mentioned these five principles of game design, and a
Mhm.
key element that we saw was surprise. While using Superhuman, there's an element of surprise for the user. So, how do you go about discovering these surprises, and what are the potential risks in adding these surprises to the product, if any?
You know it when you feel it. And in terms of frameworks to find them, I would use the 7 principles that I outlined today. One of the easiest to get started with is toys. So think deeply about the features in your product. Think about how users interact with them. And ask yourself this: do those features indulge in playful exploration? Can I actually navigate it in a way that feels fun? Is it fun even if there isn't a goal? Are there moments of pleasant surprise, which, by the way, is the very definition of fun? And if so, then you have the makings of a toy and you have the candidates for an Easter egg. Now, are there any risks to integrating these things? Absolutely. But I think they're very easy to keep under control. One risk would be that you go overboard on things like Easter eggs, on things like toys, somehow obscuring or getting in the way of the main point of your products. But I think it's rather easy to keep under control. Keep the main thing the main thing. Have your product principles. For example, it's Superhuman. The main thing is the main thing. It's your email content. The UI and Chrome always recede. Full screen is focused. Visual minimalism. Principles like there when you want it and out of the way when you don't. Because we're so clear on our product principles, for us, there isn't a risk of a toy taking over or an Easter egg getting out of control.
That's great.
Fair
That's
point.
interesting. Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. I think moving on, since most of our audience is very active in the Indian product ecosystem, um, two questions here. And one thing I think you might agree, I think although your product is still invite only, there are some power users within our community. They keep discussing about it. So the first question here is, have you come across any interesting insights on how Indians use email versus globally? Probably any particular behavioral patterns that stood out, or anything that you could share with us since you're in this space.
Well, we haven't had the chance to look at behavior on a geographical basis. What I can share is that we do have a large contingent of very happy users in India. So our top few countries are the US, then the
Right.
UK, and then Canada, and then India,
Right.
with a very, very long tail. And it's actually people from all across India, which is very exciting to see. Another thing that you might find interesting is we've now got to the point where our users save multiple hours per week. 36% of users hit inbox 0 in the onboarding itself. And half of all users hit inbox 0 within 4 hours of starting to use the product.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks for that tip.
Yeah.
Yep, that helps.
Moving on. Rahul, you've time and again mentioned that, product leaders should make a mindset shift from, thinking about what users want and need to thinking about how users feel. So any kind of tips and tricks for our PM community as to how to make that mindset shift?
Sure. Two things I would say. Number one, learn how to make software like it's a game. Practice all the methods I explained today. And then the next level is to develop your own. A lot of these things that I've shared today are how I do it, but each game designer has their own secret sauce. I happen to be super empathetic, which brings us on to the second one, which is massively increase your levels of empathy. I think if I have an unfair advantage of any kind, it's selective massive empathy. I can be incredibly in tune with how customers are feeling, and I can dial it up really high when I'm in those engagements, and then dial it down the rest of the time so it doesn't become crippling. And I think if you want to create software that feels special, you're going to have to develop a superpower, if you will, that's something like that.
Point. I think my next question is a follow-up, and this was something that I think Parth and me, while listening to your podcast on NFX, I think this was something we both were discussing right after that. So I think in that you've spoken about a new way of, the entire Superhuman experience is probably a new way of, launching, of onboarding. You have like a really nice waitlist feature that keeps growing. You have like this personalized onboarding. And I think you mentioned early on when you were doing it, you used to, make them feel so special, leave like a bottle of wine once you have some insight, like once you speak to them, and spend hours together to help them set up. So one question that we had here, is this applicable only to a certain, according to you, is this applicable only to a certain set of products, maybe enterprise products, B2B, where probably the ticket size is a little higher? How does one apply? I mean, it's a great way to do it. Everyone wants that feeling, that onboarding. But is it really applicable to, say, people who are building different kind of product? It can be indie makers building lower ticket size product. It can be people who are building for a larger audience. How do you look at it on those lines?
It's a commonly held misconception that onboarding requires a high ticket price. For example, we are able to onboard people for a $30 a month product. And the reasons we can do this are, number one, our customers have already purchased Superhuman by the time they reach the onboarding specialist. And number two, because we can efficiently use the time of our onboarding specialists, each onboarding specialist can do in the region of 35 to 45 onboardings per week. So when trying to determine if you can onboard, consider not just the sales price, but also the velocity at which you could do it. And that is a function of personnel, that's a function of marketing, that's a function of simply how long it takes to teach your product. Now, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not going to work for every single company. But I don't think it matters hugely whether it's bootstrapped, whether it's an indie thing. What matters is, can you supply enough leads to your people as quickly as possible, and can they process them as efficiently as possible such that the unit economics make out? At the end of the day, there is no substitute for modeling it out and knowing for sure.
Fair point. Fair point.
Right. So, Rahul, you've had multiple founder stints with Reportive and now Superhuman, and you've definitely worked with a lot of product managers out there. So, how do you go about hiring product managers? Is there any sort of framework or any thought process around it for you?
Yeah. Product is one of the hardest roles to hire for. So congrats everyone on the call. You're in a field that is so incredibly difficult to find someone who's excellent at the craft. Now, as a founder, you essentially have two types of PM you could hire. The PM who is like you, and the PM who is the opposite to you. And I say this because it's vanishingly rare that as product founders, we are good at everything. For example, I happen to be good at the art of products, the empathy parts, the game design part, knowing what people want, an intuition for how they will feel before they even encounter the product, and also a willingness to turn on a dime if my intuitions are wrong, which they maybe are 1 or 2 times out of 10. What I'm not good at is running the process, sometimes building consensus, delivering things on time, scope management, the whole other side to running an efficient, effective product organization. So you essentially have two choices. You can hire someone who's like you or someone who is the opposite to you. Now, you do need both, and a good team needs a balance and a diversity in order to function well. So my advice would probably be to start with the PM who is the opposite of you, but then to quickly balance that out. And ideally, you have multiple types of each. So you have a highly functioning and diverse product management team.
Got it. That's an interesting framework. I'd like to follow up on the previous thing that you mentioned. You mentioned, one is the onboarding bit and the unit economics that should work out. You've spoken earlier about how you arrived at $30 a month as the pricing for a month. Like you probably got it as a median after talking to a lot of people. Is there a certain framework that you probably arrived at for people who are just starting off, new products? It can be in a similar space, but how does one look at it right from the beginning? How do I think about, okay, this, because I think as a consensus, a lot of us struggle to charge more, or struggle to price the product the right way. I wouldn't say more. That's probably not the right. But how do we price it correctly for a market?
It is a very difficult thing for founders to charge a lot for their product.
Exactly.
Think about it this way. These products are our children. They're our babies. And unlike how a mother might think of their child, for whom their children are perfect, for us it's the opposite. Our products are never perfect. They're always imperfect. And we're always somewhat embarrassed to get them out there. It's actually interesting. It's kind of the opposite, in fact, to how parents think about their children. And so in a sense, we feel somewhat embarrassed. We feel embarrassed to charge the thing it might actually be worth. And there are many mistakes founders can make. We could think about charging for it based on cost. Well, how much it costs us for us to deliver. We can think about charging based on the markets. Well, everyone else charges this much, so I'm going to charge just a little bit lower. Very rarely do we charge based on the value it's providing to the user, because it's harder for us to think about that. And even more rarely do I see founders charging based on position. Now, Superhuman, of course, is a premiumly positioned piece of software. And so we actually don't charge based on how much it costs for us to make. We don't charge based on how much the market charges. Obviously, Gmail is essentially free. What we do charge is on the value it provides to users, which is tremendous value, and on the position that we're taking, which is we're 100% confident that we've built the most premium position for Superhuman. We've built the best email product in the market. So that's the first thing, which is pricing always starts with positioning. And I've previously shared frameworks like on the NFX framework about how to determine your positioning. Now, once you do figure out what the positioning is, the question is, well, then how do you determine pricing? And the quickest and fastest way to do this is with the Van Westendorp pricing methodology. You essentially ask 4 questions. Number 1, at what price would Superhuman become too expensive? You simply wouldn't buy it. Number 2, at what price would Superhuman be too cheap? You also wouldn't buy it because you'd be worried about its quality or its value. It seems like it wouldn't be high enough quality to use. Number 3, at what price would Superhuman become expensive? So you'd have to think about buying it. But you know what? At the end of the day, you'd still actually buy it. And number 4, at what price points would Superhuman be a bargain for the money? Now, most startups actually revolve around question number 4 because they're selling into a greenfield market. The entire market is up for grabs. And so what you're actually trying to do is grab as many users as quickly as possible before they get on a competing product. But Superhuman doesn't have a competing product. No one has gone after the niche that we've created because we have a premium product and we're the first to enter our segment. And so it's a little bit different. It's going after an incumbent. It's convincing people at this point to switch away from Gmail and at a certain point down the line to switch away from Office 365. And so we orient around the third question, the premium question. At what point will Superhuman become expensive, but at the end of the day, you'll still buy it because of your time is so valuable and you can't afford to block your team, to miss opportunities, or to damage your reputation. These things are intrinsic to who you are. Now, for us, the median answer to the third question was $29 per month. We then spoke to some pricing consultants and they told us that, you know, ending a price with 9 really singles value, not premium or high end. So let's round it up. Let's make it $30 a month. And that will signal the premium position that you want to. So that's how we did it. And I think it's the fastest way for any startup to do it.